Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
Hi, I'm Kim Polishuk.
And I'm Jen Giffen from
Shooks and Giff, the podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network.
Just like the show you're listening to right now.
Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others.
Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich, and today we're talking about classroom management. Now, I know classroom management can be a challenging topic, especially for our student teachers listening out there. First, it's important to use the first few days of your placement or your student teaching, whether you're student teaching or in a field, to get to know the rules and procedures of your host teacher's classroom. That way you're not interrupting during instruction. Hey, so-and-so has to go to the restroom. What do I do? Also, you understand what the rules and expectations and procedures are whenever you start to take over and teach content. So that way you're being consistent with the procedures that your host teacher has set up. So whenever you're in those first few days of your placement, you can jot down notes about procedures. Now, there's a lot of procedures that happen in the classroom. Here's just a small, quick example. Exiting and entering the classroom. How do students walk in? How do they walk out? How do you call on students? Do you use popsicle sticks? Do you have a random name picker up in the front of the room? Do you just call on students? How do you know each student has been called on? Or how do you take volunteers? Do you just do cold calling on students? So how do you call on students to answer questions? Another one is, how do students request permission to go to the restroom, to the nurse, to guidance, wherever they need to go? So is there a sign-out sheet at the front of the room or in the back of the room? Is there a QR code that they scan? Do they raise their hand and do they ask? Do they do some sort of visual cue to you? Hey, I have to use the restroom, and they just go. How do they line up to leave the classroom, to go from place to place in the school? What, for our little learners, what does it look like in the hallway? Like, what is their procedure for getting from place to place? What about turning in work that they missed, or late work, or just work in general? So where did they turn in their assignments? So those are just a few of the procedures. And if you're looking for some more ideas for procedures and what to look for, I have a whole list over on TPT. You can go ahead and check that out. It's 10 classroom procedures every student teacher needs to know. Again, you can head on over to the EduMagic Teachers Pay Teachers store and grab that resource. So like I said in the beginning, classroom management is tough. It is actually a huge topic to cover, and we're only going to cover a few other things today that can be in this section of classroom management. So one is call and responses. Another one is ways to engage students. And the last thing is one thing you shouldn't forget during every lesson that you teach. So stay tuned to the end to hear what that one is. All right, let's jump in. We're going to start with call and responses. I'm sure you have noticed these in your classrooms. I'm going to give you a quick example of a call and response. According to TeachStarter website, this is a great resource for teachers. A call and response, I'm sure you've noticed them in maybe a concert that you've attended or sporting events. For example, if you are from Penn State and I say we are, you say Penn State, right? Yeah, exactly. So that's an example of a call and response. But what they are is they can help gain attention for students. They can help you gain students' attention. You let them know what the expectation or the instructions are, and then they go out and about and do their thing. So students will respond back with a specific response. So let's jump into a few examples here. So one would be the teacher says, all set. The students say, you bet, or not yet. So it depends if they're ready or not. So all set, you bet, or not yet. The teacher could say, hocus pocus. Students say, time to focus. Teacher says, 1, 2, 3. Students say, eyes on me. Teacher says, classity class. Student says, yes, yes. or, classity, 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 class. Students said yesity, 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 yes. Can get to be a tongue twister. Teacher could say the school name, for example, Penn Trafford, and the students could say the school mascot, for example, Warriors. The teacher could say macaroni and cheese, students say everybody freeze. Or the teacher could say chicka chicka, and the students say boom boom. This last one is my favorite, kicking it old school. Teacher could say, all right, stop. And students say, collaborate and listen. So if you're an Ice Baby fan, yeah, that's right. We put it in there this morning for this episode, call and response. There's a lot out there. You can search for call and responses. You will get a whole list. I'm actually going to put a resource in the show notes. You can go ahead and find 26 different call and responses. So if you're feeling like yours are getting a little stale, you could totally use some of these as well. Again, the point is for you to use the call and response during the class. You can also use them to transition, maybe set the expectation for the transition. For example, turn to page 45 in your spelling book and get your pencil out and your math book away. And you count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the students go ahead and move that transition. When you reach 1, you do a call and they do the response. So that's a really fun way to also use call and responses for transition. So you set the expectation, let them know what they need to do. You count down, do the call and response, do the call, they do the response, and then everybody's ready to go to get into their next class. All right, so another part of classroom management is keeping students engaged during those times where it might be a lesson that's more lecture based or more teacher directed. Some of the ones that I love to do with my college students is to use lots of verbal praise. So I really nice job. I really like the way you designed that. Great thinking there. So lots of verbal praise throughout my lesson for my students. I also am famous for walking around the classroom or teaching from the back of the room. So I'll stand in the back and I'll have something projected on the board for them to chat about or do a think, pair, share. I love a good think, pair, share. If you want to amp that up a little bit, you can do a think, pair tweet or a think, pair post where they think about a response, they chat about it with a friend, and then they collaborate on a post to put out on Insta or Twitter. Obviously, depending on the age of your students, that could work well, or just a think, pair, share is good too for them to individually think and reflect, chat with a neighbor, and then share out in the large group. You can also do a riff on that where if you do a think, pair, share, maybe think about it, pair about it, share about what your partner talked about in the large group. That's always a fun one too. Another really nice one that I like to do with my students is, for example, if we're having 2 tabs open in our browsers, for example, we need to have our Canva tab open and we need to have our digital portfolio tab open. Check in with a neighbor, and as soon as both of you are ready to roll, give them a high five. So that way I know that they are ready to go. They are all logged in and good to go. That's always a really fun one to do. They're interacting with each other, they're interacting with you. You get that visual cue that everybody's on the right page or opening up to the right link, right? For another example of getting students engaged when you're asking questions during more of a lecture or teacher directed lesson would be if you ask a question and a student doesn't know the answer, you can say, do you need help? You can phone a friend. That's always a fun one. And students can raise their hand and they can help out their neighbor, which is great. You always want to make sure that you're using students' names when you're calling on them so they know that they have a question coming at them. Let's see, what's another one we can do? Also, you want to encourage student participation when you can. So if you have something being passed out or if students need to get materials, have students help you out with that. So have students pass out the papers or have students get materials for their group or whatever it might be. So you don't have to waste that time doing non-instructional tasks. You can continue to teach that, and maybe you have 4 students passing out materials, or you have a student passing out papers, whatever it might be. And let me see, I have some notes here. I'm going to chat. I'm going to see. Oh, this one I love to do with my students. Snap if you agree, or let's give them a round of applause, something like that. So if a student shares out a response and we give them some snaps, yeah, nice job. That always gets people smiling. Everybody loves snap. It was always a fun one to do. So just some different ways for students to get involved in a more lecture-based or teacher-directed lesson in observing some student teachers. And I've observed many student teachers over the years. Some other examples would be stomp if you agree, where students stomp on the floor, making sure that you're including students to give their feedback through an exit ticket, that type of thing. So lots of fun to do, different ways to engage students. So it's not just all lecture, you're engaging them, you're asking them questions, you're doing think, pair, shares, you're doing snaps if they agree. They can do something like if they don't know the answer to a question, they can phone a friend. Lots of different ways to engage students in more of a teacher directed type lesson. All right. Another one that we find, some students having some problems with when they're student teaching is, what do we do if students are done with their work? What do they do? So you have some students who have finished early with their work. What are some things that they can do? So here are some things that I have observed some student teachers doing. So having students reflect, why is the work that I'm doing important? Having them document, why is this work that I'm doing, why is it important to me? Why do I need to do it to the best of my ability? How do I know that I did the best work that I could? Is this the best reflection of my learning? Should I go back and check my spelling, my grammar? Should I go back and double check that I did all the problems on that sheet? Another example would be the may-do list, where they have things that they could do after they're finished with their work, which could be like independent reading, playing with some Play-Doh, going to a class website for practice, that type of stuff. So some things that they can do when they're finished with their work, or if they finished early and students are still working. So doing some self-reflection or that may-do list. All right, and the last thing every student teacher needs in their lesson, drum roll, it's a closure. So please do not forget to use a closure. This is not to be confused with an exit ticket. Sometimes they are confused with an exit ticket, but a closure is kind of like sealing the envelope with a sparkly sticker of learning, right? So you want to make sure we seal that envelope of learning with a very sparkly sticker. So a closure is a statement of what they did during the lesson. For example, today we learned about the associative property, or maybe we measured different items in grams, or reviewed chapter 3 for our upcoming test. So there's a closing statement. What did you do in class that day? A nice closing statement. You can absolutely pair up a closing statement with an exit activity. An exit activity or an exit ticket shows you what the students know by the end of that lesson. So an example could be, maybe they have a sticky note where they write down an example, where they write down a test question, or they write down a definition, and as they leave, they stick it to the door of the classroom. Or you can do something digital like a Google Form or a Lumio activity or a Padlet activity, where students document their own learning. That way you're collecting that data and you can see and look through that exit ticket data. Do I need to reteach something, or do my students have this on lock? Hopefully they have it on lock, right? So that activity can absolutely be paired with the closure. All right, time for my closing statement on this podcast. So today we talked about the importance of classroom management, and yes, it's a huge topic. It can be challenging, so that's why we're going to use our first few days of student teaching to understand the expectations and the procedures, working with the students in our host teacher's classroom. We talked about using call and responses to help students out, and my favorite was, all right, stop, collaborate, and listen. That's what the students would say. And you can use that to set expectations. You can use that for a transition. You can use that for moving from place to place in the classroom. Lots of different ways to gain that attention, share what you need the students to know, and then move on. We also talked about some strategies for students to get involved in more of a lecture-based type activity in class. One of my favorites is snap if you agree. The other one of my favorites is think, pair, share, or think, pair, share, tweet, or think, pair, share, post, and lots of positive verbal praise as students work on their content. In addition, we talked about what we can do for those students who finish a little bit early. We talked about using some self-reflection strategies, and we talked about the may-do list. And then we talked lastly about the closure. We need to put some closure on our lesson. And all these ideas that were shared today were gained through reflections from observing my student teachers. So shout out to them and their co-ops. And it's so fun to see all these different classroom management strategies in action. And I wish you all the best of luck during your student teaching placement. And remember, friends, you have the Edu Magic within you. Bye for now.
And there you have it, Edu Magicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more Edu Magic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram @sfessage. Until next time, you have the Edu Magic within you.